Think you know everything about the Jaws franchise? Get ready to be amazed by 30 little-known facts about Jaws 2, 1978, the adventurous sequel to Steven Spielberg's Gothic masterpiece. The film takes the fictionalized return to Amity Island, where the pain of shark sounds never seems to end. From sudden director changes, behind-the-scenes drama to Roy Scheider's reluctant return, Jaws 2 both evokes extreme suspense and brings the unexpected and unexpected on the waves and under the fish filming process. This is also a pioneering work that paved the way for the concept of summer blockbuster and affirmed the creation of a series of films, franchise, in Hollywood. Let's explore the secrets behind this underwater horror film. The very first sequel. Let's start our deep dive with a surprising truth. Jaws 2, released on June 16, 1978, was the very first sequel to Steven Spielberg's original blockbuster Jaws, 1975. The storyline picks up 4 years after the terrifying events on Amity Island, with Chief Martin Brody once again discovering that a great white shark has decided to ruin everyone's summer vacation because, well, apparently, a single monstrous shark fiasco wasn't enough for one coastal town. In this sequel, the tension returns as Brody must once again protect the unsuspecting tourists and the even less suspecting local teenagers from being served up as the marine equivalent of a buffet line. There's an undeniable thrill in seeing an entire community think they're finally safe, only to realize that sharks hold grudges, or at least pass the memo along to their toothy cousins. Interestingly, this film's release coincided with the blossoming phenomenon of big summer movies, a concept practically birthed by the original Jaws. Sequels were not as common back in 1978 as they are now, so Jaws 2 had the monumental task of proving that audiences would be willing to watch another visit from an aquatic killing machine. And indeed they did. The beaches might not have been safe, but the ticket counters surely flourished. What's fascinating is how the film attempts to recapture the dread that the first installment cemented into pop culture. Because if you stop to think about it, once you have a 25-foot great white ravaging your scenic island, you'd hope that would be a once-in-a-lifetime event. Apparently, not in Amity. Everyone believed they could go back in the water, only to discover that the ocean was still the ultimate theme park of terror. The iconic tagline. One of the most iconic elements that Jaws 2 contributed to the cultural lexicon was its legendary tagline, "Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water." This phrase has haunted so many aspects of pop culture that it's almost impossible to mention beaches, summer, or the concept of relaxed swimming without hearing that ominous refrain in your head. It became so instantly recognizable that even comedic takes and parodies in movies like Flipper, 1996, used twisted versions of the tagline to get a laugh or two. It's the cinematic equivalent of that friend who sees you dipping your toes in the ocean and just has to whisper, "just when you thought it was safe." And yes, it's usually followed by you awkwardly laughing while clutching your floaty a little tighter. The brilliance of this tagline is its simplicity. 8 words that reignite the fear that the original Jaws created, reminding us all that water, while lovely, might hide something big, hungry, and unstoppable. Marketers clearly understood that no one had forgotten the primal fear Jaws instilled a mere 3 years earlier, so building on that tension was a stroke of genius. The phrase has since been co-opted by countless other productions, ensuring that, ironically, the tagline itself is never truly safe from a comedic rehash in every summer-themed pop culture snippet. Spielberg opts out. Although Jaws, 1975, was a massive success under the helm of Steven Spielberg, he absolutely did not want to come back for the sequel. He famously referred to follow-ups as a cheap carny trick. which suggests that, in his mind, capitalizing on the success of a film with further installments was more about money than about artistic exploration. Spielberg even toyed with a possible prequel focusing on the tragic USS Indianapolis incident that Quint so chillingly recounted in the first film, but by the time Jaws 2 rolled around, Spielberg was busy with Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1977. Can you imagine an alternate cinematic timeline where Spielberg returned to the waters for the second film, potentially deepening the mythos around the Indianapolis or exploring a more psychologically driven tale? Instead, we got an entirely different approach, a more straightforward sequel that, for better or worse, embraced the idea of another big shark terrorizing Amity. Spielberg's stance on sequels has long been a matter of public record, and that reluctance to retread old ground might have preserved the mystique of some of his iconic works. In Jaws 2's case, it opened the door for a different directorial style, though it also set a tone in Hollywood. If the original director won't come back, the show, and the sequel money, must still go on. A darker vision discarded. So, if Steven Spielberg was out, who was in? Originally, the film was directed by John D. Hancock. However, Hancock envisioned a dark, almost depressing Amity Island, one that was left broken by the first shark attacks, spiraling into a decline that overshadowed the local community. Think of a once bustling tourist haven turned ghost town, with boarded-up shops and a pervading gloom. The producers balked at that artistic choice. They wanted something with more color, more sunshine, more vibrancy, basically, more elements that would keep audiences thoroughly entertained. After about a month of shooting, Hancock got the boot. It's something of an unceremonious Hollywood tradition, akin to studios stepping in and saying, "No, that's not quite the big, bright sequel we're paying for." Enter Jeannot Schwark, who replaced Hancock and steered the ship toward a more standard sequel approach, balancing mild gloom with some bigger action set pieces. You can sense remnants of Hancock's grittier vision in some moody nighttime sequences and the occasional bleak moment, but for the most part, the final cut skews more crowd-pleasing. Whether you champion Hancock's desire for deeper darkness or cheer for the producer's preference for a breezier, summery approach, you can't help but wonder if Jaws 2 might have been an entirely different beast, or fish, under Hancock's full control. Roy Scheider's reluctance. Roy Scheider, the man behind Chief Martin Brody, initially wanted to get as far away from Jaws 2 as possible. At that point, he was supposed to star in The Deer Hunter, 1978, a project that ended up moving on without him. Universal, however, saw an opportunity to fulfill a contractual obligation and insisted he come back for Jaws 2. If you've ever watched the movie and sensed Brody's weariness or exasperation, well, some say that was not entirely acting. Scheider reportedly resented the film's production, seeing it as a forced gig rather than a passion project. The behind-the-scenes tension occasionally bled into the final performance, ironically adding to Brody's frustrated hero persona. One can't help but empathize with Scheider's perspective. After the intense experience of the original Jaws, he probably wanted to tackle different roles and not spend another sweltering summer wrestling mechanical sharks. Yet in some ways, his return gave Jaws 2 a grounded central figure. It's Brody's paranoia, fueled by the knowledge of how bad things can get, that keeps viewers on edge. While we might sometimes say, "Gosh, Brody seems stressed out," the real question is, who wouldn't be after you nearly get eaten, blow up a shark in epic style, and then watch your entire town turn a blind eye to the possibility of a second attack? Set tensions erupt. When you force an actor into an unwelcome reprise, drama is bound to surface. Indeed, Roy Scheider and director Jeannot Schwark allegedly had a physical altercation on set, one of those legendary behind-the-scenes tales that swirl around major Hollywood productions. While details remain fuzzy, did they actually throw punches or was it more of a tense scuffle? It's certain their relationship was, at the very least, strained. Long days filming at sea, mechanical sharks that either refused to work or worked too well, a cast and crew dealing with sunburn, seasickness, and everything in between. It's a recipe for an on-set meltdown. And so, the story of their confrontation has become a puzzle piece in the greater mosaic of Jaws 2's troubled production. It's another reminder that big movie sets can be pressure cookers, and that the glamorous illusions we see on screen can mask a far less glamorous reality. While it might be comedic to picture Scheider punching out creative differences, the confrontation underscores the lengths people will go to in order to maintain or challenge the creative direction of a film. Maritime challenges. Redux. As if the drama with directors and lead actors wasn't enough, Jaws 2 faced production hurdles reminiscent of the original's aquatic nightmares. Filming out at sea is notoriously difficult. Weather changes at the drop of a hat, tides refuse to cooperate, and the ocean floor becomes a labyrinth for any props or gear that aren't firmly anchored. On top of that, the Jaws 2 crew dealt with waterspouts in the Gulf of Mexico, got up close and personal with jellyfish swarms, and even had the occasional cameo from real sharks snooping around for a bite of the action. If the first Jaws taught filmmakers that the sea is unpredictable, Jaws 2 hammered home that message with a vengeance. Suppose you're an extra bobbing around on a raft waiting for your scene, only to have a real fin appear. Are you part of the scene, or do you start screaming for dear life? The line between fantasy and reality can get dangerously blurry. Yet, ironically, it's precisely these real challenges that can imbue a film with an undercurrent of authenticity. Bruce 2. Upgraded Sharks. The mechanical shark fiasco that plagued Jaws, 1975, is practically Hollywood folklore. By the time Jaws 2 entered production, the original rubber Bruce models had deteriorated significantly. So, the effects team constructed brand-new mechanical sharks, affectionately dubbed Bruce 2. They came with improved mouth mechanisms, like advanced animatronics that could, in theory, open and chomp more convincingly. But big surprise, improved didn't mean flawless. These mechanical beasts often malfunctioned, prompting exasperated screams from the crew. If you've ever tried to get a complex mechanical device to work underwater while waves are crashing and saltwater is corroding everything, you know how big a feat that is. The mechanical shark remains one of Jaws 2's highlights, though. In the final cut, it still exudes enough menace to keep the spirit of the original's terror alive, even if some viewers today find its jerky movements a bit quaint compared to modern CGI. Cable Junction Adrift. One of the more comedic behind-the-scenes anecdotes concerns the Cable Junction set, an artificial island made of plastic and fiberglass perched on barges. This set was pivotal for the film's climax, but apparently it was so slippery that the cast risked comedic pratfalls at every turn. Worse yet, it drifted off at one point, heading toward Cuba. You can imagine the frantic radio messages. We've lost our fake island. It's floating away." Had it not been caught, might we have read a bizarre news story about an unoccupied, suspicious-looking plastic island washing ashore somewhere? In the film, Cable Junction acts as a final refuge for the teen sailors menaced by the shark, but for the real-life production, it was a comedic fiasco that made everyone's day more stressful. The entire scenario underscores how nature humbles Hollywood illusions. Even a carefully orchestrated set can be undone by a gust of wind or a rogue current, reminding us that the ocean, not the production team, is the real boss at sea. Ron and Valerie Taylor return. Of course, the production didn't rely solely on mechanical sharks to deliver that sense of danger. Ron and Valerie Taylor, the famed Australian underwater cinematographers who contributed real shark footage for the original Jaws, returned to lend authenticity to Jaws 2. Whenever the mechanical contraptions failed to do the trick, the Taylors' footage of genuine great whites or other sharks helped fill in the gaps. Their skill behind the camera, capturing the raw power and unpredictable movements of real sharks, is arguably one of the franchise's greatest assets. Blending the real footage with the staged mechanical shots allowed Jaws 2 to maintain that believability factor. While the mechanical shark roared and lunged on set, viewers could see real glimpses of sharks twisting through the water, reminding everyone that yes, these fearsome predators exist in the real world, and no, you probably shouldn't go poking around near them. John Williams' more disturbing score. Returning from the original, the great John Williams crafted the Jaws 2 score, adding new layers of musical tension that swirl around the familiar dum 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 motif. Williams described it as more disturbing than the first movie, and if you listen carefully, you'll notice that the score mingles adventure notes with harsher, more suspenseful phrases. Like the original's legendary theme, you often get only hints of the main shark motif, enough to provoke a sense of dread. It's a beautiful example of how a few carefully arranged notes can evoke pure terror. For many fans, hearing Williams's music in Jaws 2 reawakens that nerve-rattling tension from 1975, bridging the gap between the first and second film. In fact, the synergy between the film's cinematography and Williams's lush, dynamic soundtrack gives Jaws 2 a sense of cinematic grandeur, which helped it stand on its own as more than a carbon copy of the original. Highest-grossing sequel. Briefly, let's talk box office bragging rights. Upon release, Jaws 2 became the highest-grossing sequel in cinematic history, raking in around $102.9 million domestically and $208.9 million worldwide. Of course, this milestone only lasted until Rocky II, 1979, stormed the ring and dethroned it. Still, for a film that had a troubled production, a reluctant star, and no Steven Spielberg, that achievement is impressive. The success proved that audiences genuinely craved more of that Jaws experience. Whether it was the primal fear of sharks, the compelling presence of Roy Scheider, or the brand name recognition, people flocked to the theaters. This commercial triumph also set a Hollywood precedent. If a film was big, you made a sequel. For better or worse, Jaws 2 was part of that shift, encouraging studios to look at big movies as potential franchises. It's easy to see that phenomenon now in an age inundated with cinematic universes, but in 1978, it was still a novel concept. Mixed critical reception. Critical reception to Jaws 2 was decidedly mixed. On one hand, critics appreciated Roy Scheider's performance and recognized the inherent terror of a monstrous great white. On the other hand, many argued it tread too closely to the original's territory without Spielberg's innovative flair, making it feel like a less groundbreaking rehash. Over the decades, the film has settled into a respectable 60% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. That's a passing grade, though not exactly a shining endorsement. For every reviewer who admired the film's atmospheric beach shots and tension-laden set pieces, another one groaned that it had simply turned the first Jaws formula into a bigger, glossier ride. Ultimately, the audience's perspective often differs from the critics. If you want that Jaws vibe once more, with Brody scowling at clueless officials, Jaws 2 scratches that itch. Over time, nostalgia has granted it a sort of second life, appreciated by fans who see it as a reasonable follow-up to a near-perfect original. Martha's Vineyard's rejection. Although Martha's Vineyard famously played host to Jaws, 1975, Jaws 2 mostly filmed at Navarre Beach, Florida. Why the switch? Turns out the locals in Massachusetts weren't entirely thrilled about another round of filming. They wore T-shirts emblazoned with phrases like "Universal Go Home," annoyed at not being offered roles as extras and fed up with the Hollywood circus that had previously disrupted their quiet island life. So, the production sought friendlier, or at least less hostile, waters in Florida, also popping over to Destin and Pensacola for additional shots. Interestingly, the Florida beaches offered a bright, sunny canvas that accentuated the sequel's more energetic tone. Yet, losing Martha's Vineyard also meant sacrificing some of that quaint New England charm that made the original so iconic. The tension, ironically, came from real-world friction. The locals had presumably become tired of fans pointing at their beaches and exclaiming, "This is where that big shark nearly ate the entire cast." Local protests and T-shirt slogans. The frustrations of Martha's Vineyard residents were not just about the filming process. They felt left out of opportunities to be in the background or to contribute in other ways, which can sting if the production you once hosted returns without including you. Once you create a cinematic legacy in your backyard, it's odd to see a sequel skip you. So, yes, the T-shirts that read "Universal Go Home" indicate real tension. Perhaps the locals wanted cameo roles or simply better compensation. The standoff influenced the entire sequel's location planning. In the final cut, the setting is still known as Amity Island, but viewers with a keen eye might notice that the beaches and environment don't exactly match the moody, sometimes overcast look of Martha's Vineyard. For the sake of continuity, the film pretends it's the same place, but behind the scenes, it's a new beach wearing the old name. The real losers might have been local shops or tourism boards that missed out on potential publicity, though perhaps they were relieved to forego the mechanical shark chaos. Hank Searle's novelization. Hank Searles wrote the novelization of Jaws 2, which was based on an early screenplay draft by Howard Sackler and Dorothy Tristan. This novel is drastically different from what we see on screen. It presents a darker, more psychologically complex scenario, complete with a pregnant female shark, a devastated Amity Island, and even a mafia subplot where Mayor Vaughn is tangled with mobsters who try to reinvigorate the local economy. If that's not enough, there's also a storyline about Sean Brody adopting a baby seal. Clearly, the novel ventured into realms the final film never dared to. Reading it, you might wonder how the producers decided to whittle down all those bizarre subplots into a more straightforward shark returns, chaos ensues narrative. A mafia angle combined with a pregnant great white might have turned the film into a surreal genre mashup. But in the final cut, the filmmakers stuck to the simpler, more direct terror. Still, the novel remains a fascinating footnote for fans curious about just how different Jaws 2 could have been. Mafia subplot on the cutting room floor. Speaking of that mafia subplot, it would have significantly shifted the film's tone. The novel and certain script drafts show Mayor Larry Vaughn scrambling to invite shady investors to Amity to build glamorous attractions that would overshadow the town's shark-infested reputation. Imagine a scenario where, while Brody tries to warn everyone about another great white, a group of suit-wearing mobsters is busy throwing around hush money, determined to keep the beaches open no matter what. The tension between local corruption and a literal apex predator might have been both comedic and sinister. Ultimately, the producers opted to focus on the unstoppable force of nature, big shark, bigger teeth, rather than local underworld dealings. Perhaps they thought the mob would overshadow the shark, or maybe they just wanted to keep the storyline less convoluted. Regardless, it's an intriguing behind-the-scenes tidbit that shows how drastically the sequel could have diverged from the original's formula. An orphaned baby seal. That baby seal subplot is another random twist that appears in Searle's novelization, but not in the film. In that version, Sean Brody finds an orphaned seal and raises it, injecting some emotional depth into his storyline. Picture comedic or heartwarming moments as this adorable seal frolics around, unsuspecting of the monstrous shark menacing the island. Then imagine the heartbreak if the shark saw the seal as a snack. It would have added a dimension of vulnerability, bridging themes of helplessness and caretaker responsibility. On screen, that might have felt tangential to the main ordeal, which is about preventing a monstrous shark attack. But for readers of the novel, it's a small dose of emotional nuance in an otherwise tense narrative. It's another example of how different mediums, novel versus film, can drastically alter the scope of a story. A real hammerhead cameo. The real shark stories on set weren't limited to the famed mechanical Bruce II. Actor Mark Gilpin, who played Sean Brody, once claimed a real hammerhead shark circled their raft during filming. Cast members screamed, absolutely convinced this was no animatronic cameo, while the crew, apparently thinking it was a top-tier acting performance, just gave them big thumbs-ups. You can envision the panic. "No, guys, we're not acting. That's a real shark." The line between fiction and reality disappeared in that instant. Inadvertently, Jaws 2 stumbled onto an authenticity that no special effect could replicate. Good thing it was a hammerhead, which is typically less aggressive toward humans. Still, if you're stuck floating with your legs dangling in the water, that distinction might not be very comforting. Keith Gordon's film debut. Jaws 2 also launched the acting career of Keith Gordon, who plays Doug, one of the teenage sailors. For Keith, it was his big-screen debut, though he eventually pivoted from acting to become a director, known for works like The Chocolate War, 1988, and A Midnight Clear, 1992. Talk about starting with a splash, pun intended. Being thrown into the chaotic production of Jaws 2 with mechanical sharks and weather woes must have been an intense intro to Hollywood. Yet it gave Gordon the kind of real-world experience that can't be taught in film school. Often, the best directors are those who've been in the actor's shoes, dealing with half-sinking sets and malfunctioning effects. So, next time you watch Jaws 2, keep an eye on Doug. You're watching a future director forging his craft in a watery crucible. Universal's most expensive film at the time. With a budget of around $20 to $30 million, Jaws 2 became Universal's most expensive production up to that point. Adjusted for inflation, that's a huge sum, especially when you consider the original Jaws cost around $9 million. Where did the money go? Much of it funneled into building mechanical sharks, renting fleets of boats, constructing sets like Cable Junction, and dealing with unpredictable oceanic conditions. Bigger budget also meant bigger action sequences, including more teen characters on sailboats and a larger-scale final confrontation. That said, a heavier budget can also bring heavier headaches, as evidenced by mechanical breakdowns and set mishaps. Still, the lavish spending gave Jaws 2 a more epic sheen, a spectacle that tried to match the phenomenon of the first film by going larger and louder in nearly every way. Linking to the sunken orca. A clever nod to continuity occurs early in Jaws 2 when divers photograph the sunken orca, the battered vessel from the first film, before the new shark attacks them. It's a neat tie-in that reminds us the events of Jaws still linger beneath the waves, literally. For fans of the original, seeing the orca in its watery grave triggers that sense of dread. If the shark overcame that legendary boat once, what's going to stop another from wreaking havoc again? It's a small detail but effective in bridging the narrative. The synergy of continuity is key in a sequel, giving the audience that nostalgic anchor while pushing the story forward. In Jaws 2, referencing the first film's wreckage is a direct acknowledgement that, yes, the carnage continues even in the face of historical warnings. A glimpse of Hancock's Amity. Curious about how John D. Hancock's original gloomier vision might have manifested on screen? You can get a taste of it in Hank Searles's novelization and Marvel Comics adaptation. Both maintain more of that idea of Amity as a bleak, economically ravaged place that never fully recovered from the prior shark attacks. The official film, however, is more vibrant and event-driven, focusing on the new shark threat rather than the town's post-traumatic decline. It's a prime example of how competing creative directions can shape a film. Producers presumably believed audiences wouldn't want a deeply depressing Jaws 2. Instead, they favored something that offered a summery, crowd-pleasing vibe. Still, the glimmers of Hancock's darker approach suggest a more introspective sequel that might have explored the long-term consequences of a tragedy on a small town. Sneak previews, strategy. One might assume that a big film like Jaws 2 launched with a lavish Hollywood premiere, but in reality it had sneak previews on June 2978 in 31 U.S. theaters, including Lowe's State 2 in New York City. This strategic move helped generate buzz and gauge audience reactions prior to the wide release. If you were one of those early viewers, you essentially served as a test audience, your cheers or jeers informing the studio about final tweaks or marketing angles. The approach paid off. By the time Jaws 2 opened widely, enough word of mouth had built up to secure strong initial turnout. Such preview screenings aren't unusual in Hollywood, but they're always risky. If early attendees hate the movie, that negative buzz can kill it before opening weekend. Thankfully for Universal, the film's enough like Jaws, thrills, and star power of Roy Scheider helped spark curiosity rather than disappointment. The French title confusion. The French title of Jaws 2, Les Dents de la Mer 2, phonetically resembles the French word merde, which is basically crap. Director Jeannot Schwartz, being French, noticed this unfortunate overlap, which must have led to a few awkward chuckles. Marketing overseas can be perilous, given the subtleties of language. Here, a simple sequel title turned into an accidental pun on crap, which might have led to confusion or comic relief among French moviegoers. Still, the star power of Jaws overshadowed any translation mishaps. It's just another testament to how globally beloved films sometimes trip over linguistic obstacles in their quest to conquer every market. Theme park inspiration. Thanks to Jaws and Jaws 2, Universal found itself with such a hot property that they built Jaws, the ride, at Universal Studios Florida in 1990, running until 2012, as well as a still-operating version in Universal Studios Japan. Jaws 2's box office success solidified the brand's viability, convincing execs that fans would pay to experience a mechanical shark attack firsthand. The ride is famously known for its malfunctions, at least in its early Florida days, which ironically echoed the production struggles of the films themselves. But fans loved it anyway. There's something irresistible about stepping onto a boat, hearing that classic John Williams theme, and then watching a giant animatronic shark lunge out of the water. The synergy between the movie sequels and the theme park attraction demonstrates how a successful film franchise can evolve into an immersive entertainment empire. A cult favorite emerges over the decades. Jaws 2 gained a cult following, often praised as the best of the Jaws sequels, which isn't necessarily a high bar, given Jaws 3D and Jaws the Revenge. Still, fans appreciate its attempt at genuine suspense and the strong central performance from Roy Scheider. Some viewers even argue that Jaws 2, if judged on its own merit, is a solid oceanic thriller that just happens to be overshadowed by one of the greatest films of all time. Its cult status arises partly because it manages to recapture at least some of the original's tension, showing that a monstrous shark can still wreak havoc in new ways. the storyline of teenagers stranded on sailboats while the shark prowls beneath them resonates as a fresh spin on the formula. Ultimately, many fans see Jaws 2 as a respectable follow-up that retains the DNA of the original's fear, even if it never quite matches its raw cinematic innovation. Scheider's water torture. Scheider's personal torment during filming wasn't limited to overall production woes. He also endured endless water torture in a pivotal scene where Brody is hurled overboard, only to be tossed around repeatedly for multiple takes. Because Jeannot Schwark was determined to capture the perfect angle or reaction, Scheider had to submerge and flail in the waves again and again, battling weather and exhaustion. In the final cut, you see the desperation etched on Brody's face, and it's likely mirrored by the actor's real-life frustration. The synergy between reality and performance sometimes elevates a scene beyond mere acting. The struggle in the water is palpable, making Brody's eventual triumph more satisfying. Still, if you asked Scheider whether he enjoyed filming Jaws 2, he'd probably cite this scene as proof that the ocean is no friend to Hollywood productions. A pregnant shark in the novel Dorothy Tristan, credited as one of the screenwriters, brought a unique twist to the Jaws 2 lore by imagining the shark as female and pregnant in the novelization, inspired by a rattlesnake encounter that convinced her a protective predator was twice as dangerous. While never integrated into the film, the concept could have added layers of complexity, fearsome maternal aggression, or even the disturbing possibility of baby sharks soon populating the waters. It also aligns with real marine biology, where female sharks can be fiercely territorial. Jaws 2 in its final form kept it simple. Big shark, big threat. But the idea of a pregnant shark lurking off Amity's coast teases a direction that might have separated the sequel more dramatically from the first movie. Sometimes these behind-the-scenes details offer glimpses of the roads not taken, sparking the imagination about what might have been. Pioneering the sequel phenomenon. At the end of the day, Jaws 2 occupies a significant place in Hollywood history, not only because it was an early example of a major blockbuster sequel, but also because it helped validate the concept of franchises. If a film about a monstrous shark can draw massive crowds once, why not do it again and again? That business model now dominates theaters, fueling endless superhero sagas and multi-chapter universes. Jaws 2 might be overshadowed by the original, but it showed studios that sequels could be a lucrative gamble despite production hurdles and creative conflicts. And in many ways, it stands as an underrated pioneer, proving that if one iconic fish story can grip moviegoers, they'll eagerly line up to witness more dorsal fins slicing through the surf. Indeed, these 30 facts illuminate how Jaws 2 navigated myriad production perils, behind-the-scenes tensions, and creative shifts, all to emerge as a film that, while never eclipsing the 1975 masterpiece, carved out its own toothy legacy in cinematic waters. These 30 facts form a wild tapestry of behind-the-scenes drama, mechanical shark malfunctions, near fistfights, and a chunk of oceanic fear that refuses to fade. They reveal a production forging on despite storms, literal and figurative, and a creative process that saw multiple directors, disillusioned actors, and a novelization full of mafia subplots and baby seals. Somehow, out of this swirl, Jaws 2 emerged as a financially successful sequel that has grown into a cult favorite, continuing the story of Chief Brody's unending battle against nature's most fearsome sea beast. Is it as iconic as the original? Probably not, but it's brimming with enough tension, teenage sailboat horror, and Roy Scheider's exasperated brilliance to carve a place in movie history. And in many ways, it stands as an underrated pioneer of the sequel phenomenon, proving that if a film about a shark devouring unsuspecting beachgoers can terrify you once, there's a good chance you'll line up to watch it happen again especially if it's just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water.